Welcome to another episode of Take My Fire, the Soviet Influences video series talking about issues that are important to us. We, of course, the Soviet Influence, are a band, but we're also very active socially and politically, so we want to share our thoughts. Today we're talking about a topic that's very important to me, specifically Peter, the singer and one of the guitar players in the band, and that's electoral reform. So, in many places, including where I live, the election style is called first past the post. It's essentially like a horse race. Whoever gets there with the most votes wins, takes the victory. On the face of it, seems okay. I mean, the most people want something, then I guess maybe we go along with that. It gets into problems in a lot of places because it ends up silencing a lot of voices. For example, in the place that I live, the province I live in, our current government is ruling with a majority, which means they have more seats than half in our provincial parliament, but they receive less than 50% of the vote. So hear that again. They had less than half the vote, but they have a majority government, which means they can pretty much do whatever they want. And that's problematic, Minority voices, voices from people who are not in that party tend to get lost. It's also hard for people like me who live in a riding that always goes one way. Since I've lived here, more than half the people that lived here have always voted for the same party, and in fact for the same people. So there's not been a lot of diversity. And it also means that every time I vote, my vote essentially gets thrown away. So there are other options, and there are organizations in Canada and in other countries pushing for some of these alternatives. And there are countries in the world that use these alternatives. In fact, there are parts of my own country that use some of these alternatives. For example, something called ranked balloting. So in a ranked ballot, you list your preferences in order, and they go through them until someone gets the majority of votes. That gives you a little bit more options to vote for people you might not normally vote for because you're concerned about vote splitting and things like that. Vote splitting being when there are two individuals or parties that are kind of similar, and they both get a chunk of the same group of votes, while another group is very different, and they get all the votes from the people that support them, and in some ways that can lead to a victory for somebody with less than 50% of the vote. There are also proportional voting styles. So, for example, a situation where you elect your representative for your community, but you also vote for a party, and that party has a list of candidates who get slotted in so that the legislature represents the amount of people for each party proportional. There's that proportionate part, proportional to the number of votes they receive. A lot of countries do this. We see it in Europe a lot, Australia, other places like that. Use proportional voting. And there are other styles. There's other ways of doing this. There's a whole slew of this. We think this is important, and I think this is important because representation matters. It's very different in between elections when you go to advocate for a cause. When you're dealing with a government that has more than 50% of the seats and represents less than 40% of the population, or about 40%, something like that. But any number under 50, really. It makes it really, really difficult to feel represented, to feel heard, and to see any kind of compromise and flexibility. In order to get compromise in this kind of system, what you need is social outrage. It seems to be the only thing that really works. And that doesn't always even work. So you don't get the kind of debate and discussion you would get in a situation where more voices are at the table and more voices need to be heard. I'm not a big fan of party systems in general. I don't particularly like having to lump yourself in with a bunch of other people, who may or may not be on the same wavelengths as you just because of the party they represent, or to vote for a representative because of their party affiliation. I think individuals have a lot to bring to the table and a lot to say. And if they're not beholden to a party structure, that's better. That gets into a whole other area of political reform around things like whipping the vote, which we have in abundance in Canada, where if you belong to a party, you kind of go along with whatever the leader sort of says in the cabinet. And, it's a bit more nuanced than that. But at the end of the day, you end up following where your party's going, whether you want to or not. So I think when it comes to electoral reform, the most damning statistic for our electoral system is the fact that, at least in Canada, by and large, a significant portion doesn't even bother to vote. And some of that is because they don't feel that their voice is being heard, and some of that is that they don't care, which is sad and unfortunate, because the decisions that are made at every level of government impact everyone's lives in some way or another. And even those of us who are lucky to have privileged lives are still impacted by those choices, and we care that the choices that are being made build a better place for everybody, not just for us. So to that end, we want to see electoral reform. Put in the link for Fair Vote Canada, if you're a Canadian, in the description. They're an organization that's doing a lot of work around this. Recently, in my province, Ontario, our government has moved to limit the options for communities as far as elections go. That's a dangerous precedent to set, and really unnecessary. Why would you do that? It makes no sense. Let people decide for themselves. 3 communities have some form of ranked balloting now. One has done elections with it. The other 2 have recently passed that as policy. And I don't see any reason to stop them. If that's what the community wants, if that's what people want, then do it. So it's really disappointing to see our government moving to curtail democracy in that way. So at the end of the day, if we're going to live in this capitalist, democratic structure that we're in right now, we want to see electoral reform. We want to see governments formed differently. And you might too. So check out the information, look into it, and I'll be back again with you soon. Take care.